Hey everyone, Joe Von D here with another Unreal Engine 4 tutorial. Today I'm going to teach you how to make landscapes like this. So let's get to it. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is go to the Unreal Engine Marketplace, pull out our wallets, and spend a couple $100 on assets. Alright, no, I'm just kidding. Today's video, we're not going to create photorealistic landscapes, but we are going to cover the basics of how to start from scratch, create a landscape material with layers that we can blend. And it's going to be free. We're not going to use any assets from the marketplace. We're just going to use some starter content. So this is part 4 in our survival series, but you don't have to be up to this video in the series to understand what we're doing here today. We are creating a landscape and a landscape material during this video. To recap on what we've already done, we do have a third-person character with some depleting stats, items inside of the level, and if one of our stats is completely depleted, we have a detrimental effect happen. Like when we run out of sleep, like we just did, our character stops moving for just a few seconds. So let's go ahead and open this up. Just delete 4 of the walls here. You might get some strange shadows and artifacts there just because our lighting hasn't been built after we delete those walls. But we'll go ahead and handle that later after our landscape is built. If you're using Unreal Engine 4.24 or earlier, your landscape mode is going to be up here on the top left, but we are using 4.25. So in order to switch to landscape mode, we need to go here to modes, go ahead and just click on landscape. And as soon as we click it, it'll ask us if we want to create a new landscape since we don't have any landscapes already created. And the default size is pretty good. There's a couple things that you should know about landscapes before we go ahead and make one. The first thing is that the default location is in the Z coordinate 100, so it's not going to be exactly flush with the grid inside of your level. It's going to be 100 units above that, but it is going to be directly in the center. And you can change that location just by changing these values here. But I wouldn't recommend it just for our demonstration purposes since our level is kind of already in the middle of the world. You can change the rotation as well, the scale and all of that, but the most important part of creating a landscape is here in the selection size and sections per component. Now landscapes are pretty good on performance. They're really good with collision, so if you have a character or anything that needs to walk on the landscape, they're pretty well optimized for collision. They also have auto level of details for each of their components and native tessellation. The way level of detail works is that level of detail 0 will have more detail than level of detail 1, and level of detail 1 will have more detail than level of detail 2, etc. And the further away you get from an object or a landscape component, in this case, the higher number that further away component will be. That way you get the maximum amount of detail in what's directly in front of you, and things further away don't require as much detail since you can't really see them anyways. Unreal is pretty good about using screen space and determining level of detail for most objects. And one not so great aspect of landscapes inside Unreal Engine 4 is that draw calls are per component, which means that the more components you have inside of a landscape, the more draw calls you will have, and draw calls do take up a bit of performance. Now these draw calls that increase with the number of components in your landscape probably won't tax your system too much, but just keep in mind that there is an increase in performance needs as you increase the number of components inside of a landscape. We can see this landscape is just going to intersect with our floor here, and that's totally fine. We can just take a step down to go onto our landscape, and we'll go ahead and create it right now. So as soon as you create the landscape, it will go ahead and solidify. If you play at this point, you can go ahead and jump right onto it. Like I said, it's pretty optimized for collision. Shouldn't have any issues with that in the meantime. But there's no material on it. We're going to go ahead and create a material after we sort of shape it how we want to. Automatically in 4.25, it will put us into sculpt mode. Now you can go ahead and change a few different things here. For our landscape, we have managing it in case we want to add components to the landscape. I'll show you how that works. If we go off to the edge, you'll see this green box here. We can go ahead and click, and that will add a component, which once again increases our draw calls. We can delete a component by going over here to delete, selecting whatever component we want to delete, and delete it, and that will reduce our draw calls. And of course, we can move components and resize them and create splines in case we want to create a river of some sort, and that's all in the Manage tab. But what we are going to mostly use is the Sculpt tab. You can see this is sort of like a 3D modeling software. We have a bunch of sculpting options with sculpt, smooth, flatten, etc. And the main one that we're going to use during this video is obviously sculpt, but we're also going to use the flatten and smooth a lot as well. While you're sculpting, you'll have 3 different options here. You'll have tool strength, which changes the strength of your brush. So if I go ahead and start sculpting just by left clicking on the landscape, it took a couple seconds to go ahead and do this at 0.3 tool strength. But if I'm at 1 tool strength, it should be very quick in order to pull all of that up. Now our brush size obviously just changes the size of the brush we're using. We can go to a maximum 8,192, and the brush fall off changes how strong the edge of our brush is. If we go to 0 fall off, the entire circle will go up entirely. If we go all the way to 1 fall off, most of it will be pretty smooth on the outside. It's good to use a balanced approach, but it really depends on what you're trying to do for your landscape. In this case, I just want to smooth down what I did, so I'm going to go ahead and create a giant brush, turn up my tool strength a little bit, and smoothen all this out. That way we don't have those distorting artifacts here on the completely vertical landscape. Now, as you start sculpting your landscape, you'll notice that you can't really overlap your landscape. You can't have an overhang on a cliffside. You would need to use a separate static mesh blended with your landscape in order to do something like that. So landscapes are more just for creating mountainous regions, but not really for caves or things like that. In order to create a cave for your landscape, you may want to delete a component and then go ahead and create a cave from there, or you can use the visibility tool in order to mask out a region in your landscape, which, as it says, creates a hole there. Alright, so with this landscape we can go ahead and just click around to create sort of a hilly environment to allow our character to walk up. Alright, we'll go ahead and smooth out what we did, and we are going to flatten directly underneath our play space. And you can see our play space is kind of floating, so let's go ahead and just increase here and then flatten that out. That should raise it a bit. Yeah, there we go. So if we play at this point, we should have an environment that we can walk around in, traverse, and see some nice hills. One thing that a lot of people ask about are these sort of shadowy regions on each of our components. The way to get rid of that is simply just to build lighting. If you just hit build, you can see lighting needs to be rebuilt. Let's go ahead and build it. And there we go. Our landscape actor may take a hit on our performance because right now it has dynamic shadows. We can turn that off later. But you can see that those lines are gone on each of the components after we built lighting. Excellent. So let's go ahead and create a landscape material so we can get rid of this boring grid texture. Let's switch back to select mode just for a little bit and go to our materials folder here on the bottom. We're going to create a new material. Go ahead and just call it m_landscape. Open that bad boy up, and there's 2 things that we want to add in our inputs here. We want a base color, and we also want some normal mapping as well, so that there's not just a flat texture on the floor. We want our grass to have a little bit of rigidity to it, some sort of normal mapping, which gives it depth. If we drag off of the base color, go ahead and type in landscape layer blend. And this is going to be the main node that we need in order to create a landscape material. This tells it, hey, not only are we a landscape, we're also using layers, and we're blending those layers. Pretty easy. In order to create a layer, we're going to have to go here into the details panel and click the plus to add an element. And now we'll have one layer with no name. We're just going to call this one probably grass. Grass is one of the most common types of landscape material, and you're probably going to have it everywhere. Let's go ahead and add one more, and we can call this one cobblestone. And we'll have a bit of cobblestone as well in our layer blend. If we want to do another one like basic rock, we can call this one rock. There's a few different parameters here as well, like are we going to do weight blending, alpha blending, height blending? We're just going to use weight blending for this. It's a pretty simple way to go ahead and blend these three elements together. We're going to hold T down and then click 3 times inside of our material so that we can get some textures. And we're going to plug each one into a different layer. And then we'll go ahead and set our texture to the corresponding layer that we plugged it into. So make sure that you have textures ready, and you definitely want them to be tileable, because otherwise we're going to have some serious seams on our landscape. Luckily, I went ahead and just used some of the starter content. When I created the project, I imported the starter content. We're going to have a little bit of that inside of this level. For the grass, I'm just going to go ahead and type in grass, and we're going to get the diffuse. For the cobblestone, there's a couple different types of cobblestone inside of the starter pack, but I prefer the smooth cobblestone. So we're going to go ahead and click on the cobblestone, smooth, D is for diffuse. And diffuse will be our base color. For rock, we can go ahead and just get a rock, basalt or sandstone. I'm thinking sandstone. Basalt, I guarantee I said that wrong. And that's perfect. Let's go ahead and duplicate our layer blend, and we'll plug this one into the normal. That way we can go ahead and get that sort of depth that I was talking about earlier. We're going to get that by using 3 more materials. Luckily, the starter content not only comes with the diffuse, which is the D at the end of the texture there, but it also comes with the normal, which should have an N at the end of the texture name. So let's go ahead and plug in these. And of course, the texture is going to be the same as before, except this time we're going to plug in the normal _N. And you'll see this strange purple looking, blue looking texture on the little sample texture there. For cobblestone, we're going to go ahead and look for cobblestone, smooth, and normal. And for rock, of course, we're going to get the sandstone, normal. And at this point, we should be able to have this work automatically. We'll go ahead and click on our landscape, apply the landscape material. There we go. Shaders are done compiling. If for some reason you had your landscape material on your landscape before we went ahead and set up the layers, you may have to reset to default and then apply your landscape material again in order to start painting. Let's go back to our landscape mode, and we're going to click on paint. And we should see these 3 layers here, unless, like I said earlier, you had your landscape material already applied. Go ahead and reset to default and reapply it. But we can't start painting yet. You'll see that the brush is currently red. And that's because we don't have any layer info. In order to create that, we're going to need to hit this plus sign here and create some layer info. And of course, we're going to tell it that we want to blend this layer with the other layer infos that we'll create later. Create the layer info, and wherever you put it, make sure that you keep an eye on it. I'm going to put it exactly where I have my maps, and it'll be called grass layer info. Do the same for cobblestone, weight layer, or weight blended layer, and the same for rock. Perfect. So if we zoom up on our grass, we can see that it's clearly tiling. And there's a couple different things that we can do for this in order to prevent it from looking like it's tiled so much. But let's paint a little bit with our cobblestone just so we have it on the landscape. And it'll just take a moment to start compiling that shader since it doesn't have any cobblestone in the level yet. And then we'll have to do some rock. And it will compile that shader as well, since once again we don't have any rock in the level yet. There we go. So the rock definitely needs to be bigger. Each texture needs to be a lot bigger than just that. It's super tiny and can definitely tell that it's tiled. Luckily, our cobblestone, although it is a little small, it does look good as it's tiled because it's cobblestone is supposed to be tiled. Let's go back to select mode, and I'll show you what we're going to do here. Let me just put a box in the level, and I'll make it pretty big. Let's do 1,000, 1,000, and 1,000. Go ahead and bring that up. So if I add a random material to this box here, you can see that I have on the box brush these surface properties. and the scale of their UVs. So I can scale up their UVs by clicking here, and let's scale it up to 8 and apply. Now we have a much larger size of this material on this face. The other ones are still the same. But since the landscape only has one face, we only have to worry about this once on the landscape. So I'm going to show you how to basically do that. But we're not going to deal with the material scale, we're going to deal with the texture coordinates. So if we go back to our material and type in text coordinates, we're going to use coordinate index 0, go ahead and plug that into our grass and into our normal grass as well, so that we can change the size of our UVs. And I now realize that the box was probably not a good example, because in order to make the grass bigger, we actually have to change the UV tiling to be smaller. And we're going to do something like 0.25 and 0.25 in the V for our texture coordinates on our grass. Now let's go ahead and create another one just by Control-C and Control-V. And this one is also going to be coordinate index 0, and this is going to be for our rock. Go ahead and plug that one directly into the rock normal and rock diffuse. And even though it's texture coordinate index 0, which normally you would think would be the same exact one as this one, whatever we set the UV tiling to on this node will be unique to the other texture coordinate. So let's do something like 0.1. And you can see this remains 0.1 while the other remains 0.25. And we may as well do another one for our cobblestone. Let's go ahead and plug those in. This one definitely doesn't need to be that crazy. This is going to be 0.7, 0.7. Just to make the cobblestone a little bit bigger. While we're waiting for that to compile, just a little bit more information about landscaping. I didn't really talk much about how to use the Sculpt tool. So of course you can left click to bring up some landscape. If you hold shift and then left click, it'll go ahead and push down the landscape, so that should be super helpful. When you flatten things, if you use a small brush, you can go ahead and sort of create these stair-like effects. And these can look like really nice little stepping stones that you might see in certain parts of the world. Really nice. And of course, you can smoothen out certain portions just so that it doesn't look completely artificial. We can use the Erosion Tool, which will kind of be like moving around a disc inside of lotion, or like a liquid material that holds its form. You can tell that it does a lot more on vertical slopes. If you start using erosion on vertical slopes, it will damage those vertical slopes a lot more than it does more of a horizontal plane. Alright, so getting back to what we were doing earlier is painting. We can see that the rock layer looks a lot better now that it's a lot bigger tiles, and the grass does look a little bit better. I'd say the tiles are actually still pretty small, but when you're playing the game and you're a little bit lower to the ground, you might not be able to tell. So let's go ahead and paint really quickly with a large brush size. These hills can be pretty rocky. And honestly, that erosion looks a lot better on the rock layer than it does on the grass layer. So I'm just going to keep all of these giant hills more rocky. There we go. And we can have just a patch of grass here and there, maybe in the little crevices, just where water might pool up or something. You know, I'm not an artist, so this definitely is not my expertise here. All right, and then some cobblestone surrounding our little play space. There we go. I'm just going to this. Yeah, I'm definitely not an artist, so I'm sure yours might turn out a lot better than mine, especially if you put some time into it and just kind of learn the ropes a little bit. You know what? Let's create like a little oasis up here. Turn down our tool strength. One of the benefits to using blending layers is that you can turn down the tool strength and just start blending these layers really slowly together instead of having them so extreme. You can start having a little bit of grass grow on top of the rock. Alright, so now that we've messed with that, we can go ahead and have a little bit of cobblestone with some grass on top of it. I'm going to turn up the strength for this part. Just type in a little product placement there in cobblestone. Oh man, that's pretty lame actually. But alright, now that we play the game, we can see we have some small cobblestone. Honestly, that's probably about right. It's about the size of our foot for each one. Then it can blend into different layers, and you can add basically as many layers of landscape as you want. You can have different transitions to different layers. You can blend them really nicely with some lower tool strengths and some higher brush fall off. Honestly, this grass probably needs to blend in a little more subtly. Alright, a couple more things before we end the video. We'll go to our material and we can go ahead and grab off of our specular and set it to a scalar parameter. Just call this specular and set the default value just to a simple 1. And roughness, let's do the same thing. We can do a scalar parameter, just call it roughness. Also with a default value of 1. Now if we create a material instance of our landscape, just call it MI landscape. For material instance landscape, select our landscape and make the material instance. Now we can change those two parameters that we set, the roughness and the specular. Make sure that that grass isn't super shiny. This isn't the best way to do it since it will affect all three of our layers at the same time equally. Sometimes we might want our rock to be a little bit more shiny than our grass, let's say, and we can do that a little bit different in the future. But right now I just want a general roughness and specular parameter here. Alright, so after messing around with my material instance for a little bit, I think a value of 0.5 roughness and 0.2 specular is okay. But like I said, I'm not an artist, so this isn't really my area of expertise. I just think it's important for you to know how to do this, and this is a good starting off point on creating a basic landscape material and then kind of painting and spending some time doing that, learning how to do that. Once again, the component shadows are showing up, so let's build lighting to get rid of those. Alright, so at this point we have a landscape that we can traverse. We have a landscape material with multiple layers that we can blend together and customize exactly how we want the landscape to look. It is a little empty and barren right now, so we can use the foliage tool in the next video to add just some grass, bushes, and maybe some trees as well, just to add some density and liveliness to the world. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you learned just the basics about creating a landscape and what the benefits are of using landscapes rather than just static meshes for the landscape. Don't forget to leave a like, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. Doesn't cost anything, definitely a free thing to do, so feel free. I'm here to help you think like a game developer, so stick around for more videos like this.